Good morning students. In this session we are going to cover, this is just a recap of what we have seen in earlier videos. In this video I will just recap for the types of communication. See, these are 2-3 very important topics of this unit from examination point of view. In exam, what questions might be asked or what are the expected questions? In that, types of communication is definitely a question which is expected. And then the process of communication, and lastly we will see the barriers in the process of communication. But before that, I will just revise the types of communications which we have seen earlier. There are 3 main heads for the types of communication. First, that is types of communication based on channels. Then it is verbal and non-verbal communication, and again verbal communication is divided into oral and written communication, and then the types of communication based on style or purpose, and that type of communication is again bifurcated into 2 parts, that is formal communication and informal communication, and lastly other types of communication. See, I hope that the topics like verbal, written communication, oral communication, all these topics are clear to you, okay, and even formal and informal communication. As in the last lecture I have given you the detailed information regarding informal communication, which is also known as grapevine communication. Okay, then we have seen the models of communication. But before we move on to the models of communication, I would like to just explain these 2 topics which is a main part of our syllabus of unit 1, that is interpersonal communication. When the communication between the exchange of communication or exchange of ideas and information between 2 or more persons. Okay, in case of interpersonal communication, the exchange of facts, exchange of idea or knowledge, the communication between 2 and more persons, then it is called interpersonal communication. Then what are the essential qualities for the sake of interpersonal communication? Interpersonal communication is having certain elements which are important for this type of communication. When we say that that communication between 2 or more persons, it means there are 2 individuals. That individuals may be employees, that individual may be teacher and student, or that individual may be any 2 persons who have started their conversation or who are communicating with each other. So there, in interpersonal communication, what is the point which is essential? That independent individual means the 2 persons who are having communication with each other, they are having separate ideas, separate viewpoints in their mind, and accordingly as per that they are having communication with each other, and that is why it is said independent individual. Okay, when 2 persons, 2 employees or 2 students, 2 friends who are talking to each other, having conversation between them, so they are the separate individuals or independent individuals who are ready for the process of communications or who are having communication on certain topics. Then it is rational. It means what? When 2 persons, 2 friends are talking, when teacher and student they are talking, maybe they are having communication or they are discussing the topic which is related to any subject or maybe out of that. Okay, it means rational. It is not necessary that whatever the communication you are having or they are having with each other, that may be rational. So here in this point, the level of understanding between the 2 persons, that a sender or receiver, between the 2 friends or between the teacher and student must be high, or it means they can understand each other. Whatever the information is passed with the help of symbol or with the help of any short language, short messages are sent, in that case it means interpersonal communication is having that specific point, means the understanding power, the message which the ideas which are shared with them, the message which is passed on, that is why it is called rational. And then it involves personal choice. So in this type of communication, the communication which they are having, they may talk with each other with the help of symbols. They may talk with each other in verbal or non-verbal or written communication. It specifically depends on their choice. Nothing is specific. Then involves personal choice, and that is why it is called it involves personal choice. Means for the process of communication, whatever the type of communication they are adopting may be their personal choice, and that is why it is said the third point according to interpersonal communication that it involves personal choice. Now we will be coming to our next topic, that is supervisory communication. In case of supervisory communication, what are the essentials for this type of communication? When a supervisor, when a leader of the group, when the supervisor or the manager in the organization, he is communicating. It means he is called a communicator. He is the main person, he is the leader of that organization, and he is having communication with his fellow employees, with his staff or with his equal partners in the organization. And what is necessary for him or her? He or she should be an expressive speaker. When there is a meeting, for example we are taking, if there is a meeting in the organization and in that meeting that supervisor, that manager, he is on the key chair. He is the person who has called that meeting for the communication, and in that communication they are going to set their target for the sales. We are taking this for the example. For example, now they have taken this particular agenda in their meeting. So in that case, he must express, he must talk or specifically on those topics, so that whatever the other persons who are involved in that communication process, they must get a chance to speak on that specific element or that particular topic. So expressive speaker, she must be a expressive speaker. This is what it means. Second is convincing power. It means that leader, that supervisor, he must be able to convince his ideas, his views, okay, his message, his information to his employees or to his staff, and that is why convincing power. He must or she must be having a great convincing power. Unless and until if you are not able to explain, you are not able to describe your point, it means you are not a good communicator. But for the better communication process, you must have, or that supervisor or a leader must have a good convincing power. Then sensitive to the topic. Whatever the discussion is happening, whatever the conversation the supervisor is having with his fellow partners, that must be as per the topic. He must be sensitive. He must have that depthness or a seriousness about that topic, and that is why he in this topic says that sensitive to the topic. जो भी idea, जो भी issues आपने discussion के लिए लिए है, for that he must be sensitive to that particular topic. Then it is informative manager. Okay, obviously he must be able to give maximum information related to that topic which is set for the discussion. Clear hai? This is somehow the topics or elements which are considered in supervisory communication. Earlier interpersonal communication, ओके, ओरल में हमने देखा, रिटन में देखा, वर्बल में देखा, नॉन वर्बल में देखा. ओके, अगेन इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन में हैव टू पार्ट्स, वर्बल कम्युनिकेशन एंड नॉन वर्बल कम्युनिकेशन. एज वी हैव सेड, देयर आर टू और मोर पर्सन्स. व्हेन कम्युनिकेशन बिटवीन टू और मोर पर्सन्स, व्हेन द एक्सचेंज ऑफ आइडियाज बिटवीन टू और मोर पर्सन्स, देन दे मे अडॉप्ट वर्बल और नॉन वर्बल कम्युनिकेशन फॉर द प्रोसेस ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन. Then supervisory communication में कैसे होना चाहिए? That leader or that person or the manager of the organization must be an expressive speaker. He must have the convincing power. Then he must be sensitive for that particular topic, and then informative manager. These are the such qualities which a supervisor must have, so that the communication process will be easy and clear. And now we are coming to the barriers in the process of communication. This is the last topic as per our syllabus. But before that, before we start the barriers, hurdles or difficulties in the process of communication, you need to understand what is the process of communication. Communication की process क्या है? What are the steps involved in the process of communication? And when we say process, communication is क्या है? Communication is a continuous process. Unless and until that process is followed as per the steps involved in the process of communication, then communication cannot be successful. So what are the essential steps involved in the process of communication? There are 8 steps. Why we are calling it as steps? because unless we complete first, you cannot come to the next topic, and that is why it is a step by step process. Okay, first of all, when there is a communication, in that case the first thing comes is idea. What is that? Idea. And as and when that idea comes in the mind, that may be idea between two friends, okay, that may be a formal or informal communication, but when the process of communication starts, the very first step is idea, and then that idea, that message, that information has been sent by the sender. So on the second stage it is sender. Who is that? Sender, who is sending the message or who is distributing the information among the others. Now after that it is message. Obviously message is one of the important topic which is essential for the process of communication. Ki what is going to be submitted, what ideas, what knowledge is going to be processed in the process of communication. That is why it is called a message or information. Okay, then it is encoding. Then that message get encoded. Okay, whether that message has been sent in the symbol, okay, whether that message have some signs, that is what is encoding. And then the fifth point, which is very important again, that is the channel or medium of प्रोसेसिंग द कम्युनिकेशन. अगर आपको कम्युनिकेशन प्रोसेस में चैनल चूज करना है, एंड दैट चैनल मे बी अ टेलीफोन, मे बी अ ईमेल, or maybe a verbal communication, maybe a non-verbal communication, maybe a oral or written communication. So channel, how that message is going to be forwarded, that is what is channel or medium for the communication process. And after that there is a receiver, means sender and receiver. In between there are message, encoding and channel, and then it goes to the receiver. Then that message has been passed on to the main person who is the receiver. When the message comes to the receivers, he is decoding that message. What he does? He is decoding that specific message, and after decoding the message, it is up to the receiver that he must give a reply or a feedback to whom? To the sender, from where the message has been received. Okay, the sender sends the message, then encodes, then he says via channel, then the receiver receives the message, then he decodes the message. Decodes करता है मतलब क्या करता है? He keep his answer ready for that particular sender message. Okay, then he decodes the message and then he gives the feedback to that specific message which has been received from the sender. So this is what is, again I have explained the process of communication, and that is why unless there is an idea, then there will not be a sender, and when there is a sender, he will send the message, he will then first encode the message, then he will send that message with a specific channel, then the receiver will receive the message, and then that message, the receiver will decode the message, he will keep his or her answer ready to send the reply, and the last is feedback. That feedback goes to the sender, and that is why we can draw these steps like this also. How? Idea, then message, then encoding, then channel, then receiver, then decoding, and finally it is feedback. Here the process ends and here the process starts. Okay, this is how in the exam also you can draw such kind of small graph or small diagram, so that the examiner will feel, or he or she will feel that yes, this particular student have understood this topic. Okay, now why I have repeated this process of communication? Because to understand the barriers in the process of communication, you need to understand first what is the process of communication, because barriers are based on the process of communication. Then what are the difficulties, what are the hurdles which are always reoccurring in the process of communication, and that is why the barriers are there in the process of communication, because this process, if it is not taken place according to these steps, okay, if these 4 steps are not followed by the sender, or if the receiver is not giving the feedback, then there are certain barriers, problems, difficulties which arises in the process of communication. And now these barriers, okay, these barriers have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 topics. Which kind of, how many types are there? 5 types of barriers in the process of communication. Communication के process में there are the 5 barriers. First is semantic, then it is psychological, then it is organizational, then personal barriers and mechanical barriers. These are the different types of barriers, and again semantic barriers have again 4 to 5 types topics. Then again psychological have 5 topics, and then organizational barriers again they are divided into 4 to 5 types, and again personal barriers are also having 4, 5, 6 topics, and mechanical. Now why these barriers? You always are aware कि barrier means hurdles or the difficulties which are faced by the sender to the receiver, or which are arise in the process of communication, and that is why these barriers of communication we will see in our next lecture, in our next session, so that you will get a better idea about the barriers in the process of communication. Now this is sufficient for our today's session, and in the next session we will see in the details about the barriers in the process of communication. Thank you.